Good evening, friends. Last week, I began to demonstrate how the book of Habakkuk is much like a beautiful and powerful worship service, a liturgy. Scenes of high drama, scenes of intense poetry, probably set to music, and scenes of earnest, worshipful prayer and adoration. Tonight, we'll finish that different kind of look at the book, a look at how a Jew in the Old Testament times might have experienced Habakkuk's message, a message in the form of a song. Think of a musical, perhaps. Let's review what we saw last week in terms of the form of the book of Habakkuk. Remember, we can divide the book into 5 sections. The beginning of chapter 1 is Habakkuk's first appeal to God, in which he asked why and how long. How long would God allow the open, blatant sin of the Jews? And then the second part of chapter 1, where God gives his first response, in which he assures Habakkuk that he has a plan to raise up the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, to discipline the Jews. The third section is the end of chapter 1, Habakkuk's second appeal to God, in which he was even more worried, because the Chaldeans were even more evil than the Jews. These first 3 sections seem to me to resemble a powerful and dramatic dialogue between Habakkuk and God. Now here comes the music. The 4th section, as we saw last week, is chapter 2, verses 2 through 20, God's second response to Habakkuk, in which he assures Habakkuk that he, God, will deal with the Chaldeans because of their evil in no uncertain terms. You may recall the 5 woes. Well, this section has the feel of a mournful dirge, heavy with melancholy sadness. It is clearly in the form of a poem, each of the 5 woes presented in a stanza or verse, and it probably was sung or perhaps chanted by worshipers. And as we pointed out last week, 2 of the stanzas include the exact same words, much like the chorus of a song that we might sing today. Then finally, the 5th section of the book of Habakkuk is found in chapter 3. Chapter 3, Habakkuk's wonderful prayer of trust in God, in which he makes a complete transition from lament to praise, from anguish to reverence and trust. Habakkuk even gives this section a title. He calls it a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. It is a prayer in the form of a psalm. Let's look more closely. Immediately after Habakkuk declares the title, in chapter 3, verse 1, he uses an interesting, obscure word, Shiganoth. I think that's close to how it might be pronounced, Shiganoth. It is a musical term, indicating either a musical style or perhaps a melody. We might even today sing a song up-tempo or with feeling. Well, in a similar way, this term would have guided the way in which the psalm was sung in Habakkuk's day. The text of chapter 3 then goes on to recount several of God's works on behalf of the Jews in the past. But in verses 3, 9, and 13, during this recounting of God's work in the past, we see another musical term, Selah. This term, Selah, is often used in the Psalms, maybe 71 times in the Psalms. And it indicates a pause in the song, a time for silence, perhaps for reflection on what had just been sung. Well, then finally, the prayer, chapter 3, this book, the book of Habakkuk, end with a direct musical notation. Habakkuk writes, "To the chief musician with my stringed instrument," telling how the psalm, would be sung in worship with stringed instruments, and giving direction to the chief musician to have it sung in that manner. Clearly, this was a piece of music, part of a powerful, dramatic worship service, scripted by the Holy Spirit through the prophet Habakkuk, and intended for use in worship by his people. Now, as you think about that conclusion, the even if conclusion, can you imagine how the presence of God filled the temple when his people gave him praise during this, the grand finale? God bless you, friends.